domain name lawyer. And this is the panel about the .com price increase. And we have some distinguished panelists. Where is everyone? Why is this room so light on people? Because this is perhaps the biggest issue that's going on in the industry. VeriSign has agreed with the Department of Commerce that if ICANN approves, it can increase prices. And that's probably going to impact everybody here. So let me introduce our panelists. First, Zach Muscovitch. Do I pronounce that correctly? He's the general counsel of the ICA. The ICA, of course, is essentially the internet trade organization that protects you all, and so you know a lot about .com price increases. Andrew Alleman is the publisher of Domain Name Wire. You read his stuff every day. He's kind of a celebrity, and he's here. And speaking of celebrities, Elliot is the CEO of Two Cows. Two Cows is the second largest registrar in the world. You can say wherever you want. Yeah, go ahead. And Two Cows runs OpenSRS. It is a platform for resellers, and that platform has been running since the year 2000, right?
Since the year 2000.
Okay, and here you should have a mic. You're number 3, pot up number 3. We should start with Elliot. So in the year 2000, which is 18, 19 years ago now, what was the profits that Two Cows had on .com? And now, 2019, what are the profits on .com? And how is the registrations? Tell us about the registration metric compared to the profits. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a great little bit that I think frames the way that .com works through the industry, particularly with registrars. You know, we have a little chart in our Q3, we're a public company, and in our Q3 Q&A, you can see it in our investor section. We have a little chart that shows that in 2000, we made just about the same amount of money on .com as we did in 2018. And
so what are you complaining about? You're making the same amount of money.
Right. Well, if you look at the chart that we present, you know, what you see is that VeriSign is making more and more and more money every single year in .com. And I say all that to say, you know,
so you're selling more domain names now.
Every year the units go up. Every year, you know, that volume takes the total take up.
In the year 2000, so there'd be a price to your customer, the registrant, the consumer, the end user, and what % of that price would Two Cows get?
Yeah, it's in the chart, so I'll say that the canonical answer is there, but it was kind of a, you know, 2/3, 1/3, and you know, today that's probably down in the low teens as a % of the total. I mean,
I think I read it's 12%.
Yeah, that sounds.
So VeriSign gets 88% of the revenue, you get 12%.
That's right.
And who's promoting the name? Like, who's doing the sales? Is it VeriSign or is it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been, you know, complaining for 20 years about the fact that, and you know, apologies to all the registries in the room, that you know, registrars have to do 80% of the work for 20% of the profit, and you know, nobody really feels. You know, any sympathy.
Surely VeriSign's performing more services for you. They provide security and stability that's unmatched by anyone else. Shouldn't they make more money because of that?
Yeah, I mean, our short answer there is, you know, we don't think so. We think that one of the great reveals in the new GTLD program is that these operations, while very important, and I would never minimize security, you know, are not that, they're not rocket science, and they're not that expensive, as you can see by the registry fees that are charged by all of the suppliers out there. And there's two things I should add there. You know, with all of this, it's don't hate the player, hate the game. I mean, I think that VeriSign is doing exactly what they should do. You know, my bones to pick are elsewhere. And, you know, the second part of that is, you know, that we really, really need to, you know, look at the total landscape of top-level domains in order to understand, you know, why things are the way they are.
Zach, you're the general counsel of the ICA, and some of your members have come under criticism lately because you have members who register names at like the wholesale cost of $7.85 plus 18 cents to ICANN, and then sell those names for thousands of dollars, depriving consumers of the right to register them for like $8. And so is there any criticism that's due to your members as opposed to, say, VeriSign for having its profit margin?
Well, thank you, Derek. What to me is interesting and telling is, why would we be talking about domain investing when we're really here to talk about .com pricing? And the interjection of the domain investment industry into this dialogue, to me, is an effort at misdirection. The real question is, and let's be honest, nobody likes someone else poking around in their wallet, right? And VeriSign is an excellent company. They're our friends and colleagues, and we want them to succeed. In fact, there's no other company that is as enthusiastic about .coms as domain investors as VeriSign. We believe in them. They've done an excellent job maintaining security and stability, and the domain investment community has benefited from that. And so why are we interested in a .com price increase? Well, there's several reasons. The first one, of course, is that, listen, domain investors tend to own more than one domain name. And so any increase in price obviously has a bottom line impact on domain investors, and that's obvious. The second question is, well, if there is a request for a price increase by VeriSign to ICANN, what is the justification for that price increase, right? And that's an interesting question, but the third question, which relates to the second one, is if there is going to be a justification for a price increase, where does the money go? Should it go to a private company that has done tremendously well with the current $7.85 wholesale price? Their stock price has risen from $50 5 years ago to $150. They make hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Their profit margin has been reported on an operational basis of 60%.
But they're in business to make money. What's wrong with that?
Well, this is exactly it. Why should I care what a public company that's engaged in trying to make a profit, as they should, why should I care about the price? Well, it's a fundamental question about what role VeriSign plays in the internet. In my view, VeriSign plays a crucial role as an administrator of the .com registry. They've operated for so long that sometimes we forget that the ownership of the .com registry doesn't belong to VeriSign. Really, it's almost a sacred trust. ICANN is a trustee for all internet users, and .com's an integral component of that. And so, if we think about it, and I dislike analogies because they're often imperfect, but if we think about an apartment building that retains a superintendent to manage it, who sets the price for rent? It's not the superintendent, it's the owner. And in this case, the closest thing we have to ownership of the registry is ICANN itself.
What about the United States government? And why shouldn't the government cap prices, and we should allow VeriSign to raise prices to the level the government thinks is appropriate?
Right. Well, what's interesting is that we've seen a different approach from different administrations on this issue. During the last administration, there was an attempt to raise prices by VeriSign once before, and at that point, the Department of Commerce stepped in and essentially said, no, there's no justification for a price increase, and so we're going to cap it at the $7.85 wholesale price. And currently, VeriSign has a contract at $7.85 till 2024. Now with the new administration, with a new director at the Department of Commerce, took a different perspective. And in a sense, we agree with them and disagree with them. I'll explain to you why. What they said is three things. One, they said that we are going to lift the previous cap. We dislike that. We think that there's no justification for lifting the cap. But they also said that VeriSign is able to pursue this with ICANN. They did not say you're allowed, we're giving you a price increase. They're saying you have to take it up with ICANN. ICANN's the decision maker. The third thing that they did is they said you're able to raise prices of X% over a certain number of years over the course of the contract. And that to me is very telling, because what the government is essentially saying—
Specifically, the last 4 years of the contract period.
Right. What NTI is essentially saying there, Derek, is that they think that there's an appropriate price point, right? The government is saying there's an appropriate price point. Now, they didn't consult with us, they didn't consult with ICANN as far as I know about this, But if there's an appropriate price point, the question is, what is that appropriate price point? And does the Department of Commerce know what it is? Or should VeriSign be able to raise it to whatever price they want? Suppose VeriSign wanted to raise it $50. Should the NTI let them do that? No. So it's a question of what is the appropriate price point.
Why shouldn't VeriSign be able to raise it to $50 if...
It comes back to the fundamental question. Who owns the registry? Should the superintendent set the prices, or should the owner set the prices? And is there a reason for prices to be raised other than to increase shareholder value? Now, I don't fault VeriSign for this. They're a tremendously successful, competent company. I understand that Berkshire Hathaway has a significant investment in VeriSign, even though they typically don't invest in internet companies. And I understand also, it's been reported that out of Berkshire Hathaway's it's the third best performing stock in Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio. They're doing something well. And if they increase prices, it will do even better. But what is the justification? What justification does ICANN have for permitting a price?
Okay, Andrew, you are a journalist. You write about this industry. You track all aspects. And you don't have a stake in it. You don't own a registrar, you don't own a registry, you don't have a large portfolio of names, so you can speak objectively. The question, what justification does VeriSign or ICANN have to raise prices? May I suggest it's fair competition. We have 1,200 new GTLDs in the marketplace, and some might say that they're not performing well, some might say they're thriving, but in any event, VeriSign now has competition where it didn't in the past. So should it be able to raise prices?
You know, the competition question is a good one. There have been hundreds of top-level domains for many years, right? The new top-level domains just added upon that. We had lots of CCTLDs. VeriSign on its investor conference calls, when people have asked what impact are these new top-level domain names having, they're saying, you know, look, .com does have a special place. It's got that brand reputation and security reputation to some extent. And so I firmly believe .com is a different animal. And when it comes to price increases, there's a reason that the US government has played a role in this. And there's a reason that .com is treated differently than other top-level domain names.
So do you think that over time, at least, VeriSign should be able to raise its prices? Because presumably, when it does, according to general market dynamics in any market, consumers are going to delete their .coms and they're going to flee to .club and .icu. Is that a possibility?
Because .com has this special place, I think that the pricing dynamic is very different. You know, if it goes up $2 within a year, am I going to switch to another top-level domain? There's a significant amount of lock-in with a domain name. Changing a domain name it's a big task. And so if you started on .com and 20 years ago, or even a few years ago, you're unlikely to switch. Now, one thing that we have discovered through the launch of new top-level domain names, as Elliot alluded to earlier, is that the cost of providing registry services is very low. There are lots of competitors. We saw in a recent lawsuit that was filed over India that some of their competitors are out there offering $1 or $2 per name per year. So the actual cost of running this is very low. And we also see VeriSign's public. We see their public numbers. And I'm a capitalist. VeriSign, if I were in VeriSign's shoes, I'd be doing a very similar thing. I need to get as much money out of this as I can. And really, they have one job, right? That's make as much money from .com as I can. So I understand that. What troubles me, looking at it, is I think it was disingenuous at best, the blog post they put out after they won their price increase, which after spending the past 10 years courting people in this room, courting domain investors with tools to buy more domain names, encouraging them to invest in more domain names, they said they put out this blog post saying that domain investors are bad.
And specifically, they're bad because?
Well, it's not good that domain investors are ripping off consumers or taking money out of consumers' pockets. And they suggested doing a follow-up post, that they were going to have a follow-up post saying how to better allocate domain names. Haven't seen that. It's been a couple months. But basically saying, I looked at it as kind of a diversion. Hey, don't look at us raising our prices a little bit. Look at these guys that are charging you $3,000 for a domain name that they're buying for $10.
And part of the criticism of VeriSign, which is implied in the statement that you made and Zach made, is that VeriSign's costs are really low in relation to the money they're generating by running that registry. But when you look at the market as a whole and consumers who may want to register at .com, the consumers can't get it because of these domain speculators, the scalpers out there that are buying at a low price and warehousing and only selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that fair from a market standpoint that VeriSign doesn't get to share in that profit when they're responsible for the security and stability of the internet?
Yeah, I will say there are a lot of domainers out there that are not very profitable. You know, the holding costs, the acquisition costs of domain names are extreme. I would say, you know, Paul Nix had a graph up there the other day showing the extreme investment of a typical or hypothetical domain name investor over time and the hundreds of thousands of dollars they're putting in before they saw a cash flow positive year. I think anyone will tell you this business is not easy. And also when you look at the allocation of .com domain names, we can't go back in time 20 years and allocate it differently, which I think is a very, very valid point in the discussion.
Elliot, with all the TLDs now, there's a contract that provides that the registry operator, they have a no-bid contract. Once they're awarded the registry operator gets that forever. And I suppose that makes sense with new TLDs because they had to compete against one another to have that right. VeriSign did not. Do you think that VeriSign should have a clause in its contract with ICANN where ultimately there would be a competitive process? Affiliates, Newstar, and CentralNIC, and MMX, and Uniregistry could come in and bid and get .com.
Yeah, I mean, you say should. And
it's a policy question.
Yeah. You know, for me, I think we have to go back in history first. This was a no-bid contract. This was awarded. It was awarded in particular circumstances, much before there was any appreciation for what this was all about. Any new GTLD applicant was competing and often paying millions, and in some cases tens of millions, and in one case VeriSign itself paying hundreds of millions.
For .web.
Yeah. So there was much more of a sort of a fair market or a free market approach to those. What's possibly more important though is that that .com lived in a world, and remember that Network Solutions, bought by VeriSign, controlled com.net.org. In the origination of ICANN, ICANN was driven by, was formed to, essentially take the energy away from an alternative movement to introduce competition at the top level. The compromise that was struck there, was a classic slicing of the baby in half, and the concept of registrar was invented out of whole cloth simply as a compromise to avoid introducing competition at the top level. So what you had there is an unnatural market structure at the beginning. You then have years where there is either no competition or significantly constrained competition. You had the very complicated round in 2000, 2001.
.info, .biz, .arrow, .coop.
One of the things that's been, felt true to me, just as a market observer and market participant, was that you would never really have material competition at the top level until you introduced hundreds of names, a significant volume of names, enough volume of alternative strings that you would start to have semantics at the top level matter. We live in, we're just sort of fish swimming around in the water and not noticing the water, but we live in a world on the internet where there was, at least until this round introduction, there were no semantics to the right of the dot. And I talked on this stage about the big innovation being semantics to the right of the dot. To me still, to this point, the new strings have not taken full advantage of that at all. So you have this situation where there was an artificial market construct, there was a no-bid award, and there was significantly constrained competition by ICANN in the introduction, that had this, what we have today, which is a significantly distorted market, a market distorted by regulation. So when we look at that, making simple statements like, why shouldn't they be able to raise the price, or why should there be, any look at something like that? We can't look at any of these issues in isolation. We have to look at them in the context of both the history and the totality of the market. And when we're talking about new registrations, which make up a sub 20% size of the total transactions that we'll see in 2019, there is substitutes when you're registering a new domain name. 2cows.com was registered in 1993, I believe, and we have no substitute good there. We are locked in.
So if VeriSign could tell you, 2cows, you must pay $10 million to keep 2cows.com, would you, or would you abandon it for 2cows.icu?
The bile that would rise in my stomach would make it difficult, but I imagine that my board would probably force me to pay that money. So I don't know what that would look like, but I think that for whether we'd even think about it, deeply implies that companies, and there's so many of them that are much bigger than us, would absolutely.
Any questions for the panel? It's perhaps the most important panel of this whole conference, right here. I had suggested I'd run around with a microphone, and they said that they'd be faster than me, but I just don't think that's true.
The two words I haven't heard are monopoly and oligopoly. It seems to me that when you have 90+% of a market, you in effect have a monopoly. And when you have a monopoly, usually we make concessions and do not allow full pricing. After all, we did break up Standard Oil New Jersey. So it seems to me that there are some market reasons of why there should not be unlimited pricing.
So, Zach, there's going to be a discussion, it's probably ongoing right now, we don't get to be part of it, between VeriSign and ICANN about whether they can increase prices. And you have concerns, your members have concerns, there's people in the room that have concerns, we just heard a concern. What should the people in the room do to impact that discussion, if anything? What is your organization doing?
Right, so I mean, as Elliot was mentioning, .com is in this unique situation. It has like this captive market where it's very difficult for many companies who have adopted .com as their brand name or their primary corporate domain name to switch off of it. So they have the captive market. And there's only one place that issues .com domain names, and that's VeriSign. And they've experienced significant growth every year in .coms. It continues to be popular. The advent of additional new GTLDs may somewhat change the dynamic, and this is one of the arguments that NTIA, the US government agency, ostensibly made, is that, there's new social media, there's new GTLDs.
Just to be clear, the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, that's a technical body within the Department of Commerce. So people hear Department of Commerce, they think economics, they think they understand markets, but this is the NTIA, and you may want to clarify what they're...
Sure, so, I mean, they are ostensibly the government agency that's provided the ostensible oversight for what it's worth.
And they oversee like spectrum.
Yes.
Like radio waves and
stuff. They tend to be more interested in spectrum allocation and maintaining that as a public trust than .com domain names. But, one of the things that NTIA said when they released their latest statement on this issue is they said, there's social media, there's new GTLDs, this creates a new dynamic that should allow VeriSign to have more pricing flexibility. But really, if there is more competitive pressure, even assuming that's true from social media, from new GTLDs, what should happen to the price of .com registrations? Would a company that is facing additional ostensible competition raise their prices in order to face the competition? Or would they lower their prices?
Well, if they have a better product, maybe they can raise their price.
Okay, so this is good. If they are to raise their price, for every dollar that they raise their price, if there's 138 million .com domain names, they make an extra $138 million, right? That's some pretty amazing math when it comes to additional revenues. So as the internet community, as stakeholders, if the market can bear a raise in price, which it probably can, should that money be directed to the shareholders of VeriSign that are outside the ecosystem, or should it be directed to good works projects? Should it be directed to lowering the price of registrations, even though the market could possibly bear? These are important policy questions, and I believe that if ICANN is seriously considering allowing a price increase, they should have some very good answers to these questions. They should say, why should, if the market will bear an increase in price, why should those hundreds of millions of dollars that add up to billions over the course of not too many years be directed outside of the industry into the shareholders' pockets and may not be reinvested, may be put elsewhere, and why do those people deserve that windfall and not either lowering the price or directing the funds elsewhere?
Questions for the panel. .com price increases. No questions. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Zach, because I don't know that he answered it. I want to hear your answer. If the people in the room have a concern about the price increase, what can they do?
Well, I think where the ball is now, as I understand it, is that VeriSign, so VeriSign has a contract with ICANN that goes with fixed price. Price can't be increased for another about 5 years, I think. Maybe not quite that long. But you can renegotiate a contract, right? And the contract was put in place with the thought of, hey, this NTIA agreement is coming up for a renewal, this cooperative agreement. So I have no doubt, if I were in VeriSign's shoes, I'd be knocking on ICANN's door. Hey, let's do this. We've got this NTIA is going to allow us to do this. Let's increase the price. And there are things that VeriSign can offer to ICANN. You guys all know ICANN is under a bit of a budget strain right now. In fact, I believe the number was over the next 6 years to replenish their reserve, they're going to get $6 million that they're going to pull and put into the piggy bank. About half of that coming from the new top-level domain name auction fund. The other half, well, they can cut staff. No one likes to do that. Or they can look to outside ways to get that. And so maybe that's one of the levers that VeriSign pulls, which is we'll chip in a few $1 million more over the next few years. And of course, that'd make a lot of sense for VeriSign, right? They'll get a lot more money. So I think the ball right now is in ICANN's court. And based on history, I don't see them putting up too much of a wall against this, but that's where people, if they want to lobby, if they want to take part in the process, that's where they should do it. Now, a lot of the contract renegotiations with ICANN, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of them seem to be done behind closed doors. You have, they added the URS to a lot of contracts without really asking the community, should we add the uniform rapid suspension to these other contracts? And so I don't know how public this process will be. I hope it's very public. I hope it doesn't come down to just the point where they publish the contract, give the comment period. So, Elliot's.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple pieces that I think, again, you know, we need to look back on in history and then well understand this creature that is ICANN. You know, the first is that, you know, we've been here twice before. Once was the original compromise I talked about, which was that registrar split, which had
year 2000.
That's previous to that. This is 97, 98 at the onset of ICANN. Year 2000 is, you know, 99 testbed registrars launched, 2000 the doors opened. Shortly thereafter, there was the original compromise around the contracts, which, you know, I call it the win-lose draw, where VeriSign agreed to, they got to keep COM up on the shelf. .net would be a competitive process, and
VeriSign dropped prices by 30% on .net.
Well, don't go there yet. You know, it was kind of keep COM, compete for net, and we'll give up org. That was the original compromise. You then had them coming probably in the 06, 7, 8 time frame and looking on the renewal for price increases, and that's where they got the 7% in 4 of 6 years compromise. And it's very important to understand where that came from. That was ICANN, which is in perpetual, budget crisis, run by a CEO at the time who saw the solution to his budget crisis as cutting a deal with VeriSign. So what he got for the allowing of the price increase was additional contributions to ICANN.
Through .net.
Through a couple places. So there were a couple different mechanisms where additional revenue was generated for ICANN. So it was kind of a we'll get some, you get some, internet community will pay it all on. So this is the third time, but I think it's very important for everybody in the room to realize, when we talk about, Andrew mentioned, maybe a secretive process around the contract negotiation, it may not. Here's what I can say categorically. The process that ICANN will go through for their review of the .com increase will be orders of magnitude more transparent than the process that the NTIA went through. So what happened inside of a typical nation state mechanism was completely behind closed doors, maybe with some minor consultations. What happens at ICANN will be structurally significantly more transparent than that. And I think that, for so many people in the room, ICANN feels like a steep hill to climb, and they're more comfortable thinking about that in the context of, doing something with USG or a state government, etc. I promise you all, if they're in Kobe or in Marrakesh or in Montreal, the sorts of the next 3 meetings, I don't know when this is scheduled for, if there are a room full of interested people like there is, you take the crowd that is sitting in one cocktail party here and put them in the public forum, that will change the course.
So
I'm not saying that that will
can have impact by going to the ICANN meeting and speaking up.
And participating, what goes on through the ICA, is very helpful. These guys are there and they're present. But I'm telling you, it is a place where your voice can be heard. And so I think that we're all, a lot of us are not used to this weird creature that is ICANN and are used to typical national government processes. Boy, are those opaque. The transparency that you find here, for better or worse, I may not be happy with every decision, but it's a fundamentally more open process. So.
Questions for the panel?
I have a question.
Wait, your mic's off. We want to hear you. So.
Hello?
Sound great.
I have a question about some of the initial feedback we received about the .com price increase from ICANN is that it's not the role of ICANN board to set prices. And say more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah.
So you have to understand what the soil that bush lives in is. ICANN is a not-for-profit California corporation that is in perpetual fear of being called a regulator. I'm sitting here, I'm happy to say ICANN is a regulator. Right? But ICANN will never say they are a regulator. And when it comes to something like, controlling prices, that really makes you look like a regulator. So there's a big difference. I think that there need to be a reframing there. It's not about controlling prices, it's about, sort of managing this increase because of the history. And so, if you ask me, I know that ICANN has no appetite for this fight. I also know that with enough public, on a relative basis, their appetite and willingness to engage in a deeper dive into this issue will be 100% a function of external perception. And so, that's why I say, boy, the more voices that are heard, the better. But, I give that advice around ICANN's, aversion to being called a regulator, so that you can think about your words and, try and put it into frames that are more effective for them.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that, Derek, is remarkably, we heard something very similar from the U.S. government agency, the NTIA. They said they don't get involved in pricing either. And so ICANN doesn't get in pricing, NTIA doesn't get in pricing. Who's going to get involved in pricing?
The market.
The market on behalf of who? Who should get the revenue from the market? ICANN, if they're anything, they're the owner, right? So they don't need to be a regulator to set the price. They can set it as the owner. The thing is that, you know, in terms of, we've heard from ICANN in response to a letter that the ICA submitted that they're going to put the new proposed registry agreement out for comment. And we don't know when that will occur, but the ICA intends to submit its comments about .com pricing then, but the entire community needs to be involved in that respect. We need support in terms of membership, but also in terms of other voices, such as Elliot's voice, such as Andrew's voice, who's a journalist, but other people who have voices about this.
So you're imploring the people in this room to comment. Yes. When that new proposed registry agreement is released, tell your friends to comment.
Right, and we set up a petition that was modestly successful as well, Derek. We had 25 people from the 2,500 people from the internet community express their opposition to .com price increase. And we submitted that to the US government for their consideration. Of course, they decided to ignore, and now they're punting it to ICANN to make the decision. So if it's ICANN that makes the decision, all community stakeholders need to express their views, and if they're against it, express that view.
That's not a decision, just so we're clear. They're reviewing the NTIA's decision. So, you know, ICANN would like to, as much as possible, do nothing.
Well, that I agree with you, the last part of what you said. That's my understanding as well, is that they obviously don't have an appetite for this. They'd rather not fight with VeriSign. Path of least resistance is often very attractive. But in terms of a decision, the exact language of the NTIA in their last statement, the Amendment 35, is very clear. It is up to VeriSign to pursue this with ICANN, and that it will be up to ICANN about what this new registration agreement looks like.
Greg McNair, you have a question for the panel, or a comment?
Yes.
They got to
Hello.
applaud you.
Yes, I, at the risk of sort of redirecting some of your thoughts here today and moving off the topic just a little bit. Earlier, Zach, you dismissed the comments made by VeriSign in the blog that were proposing changes to the ability to transfer names, which used the emotive terms like scalping and whatever. I'm wondering whether this is a much bigger elephant in the room than pricing, and what your thoughts are as to, you know, if this bigger elephant comes in and it's something that this, you know, everybody's a little bit concerned about price increases, they're going to be a hell of a lot more concerned about not being able to trade their names. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. Is it just a diversion, or is it something that is going to impact our industry much more than price increases?
Are you suggesting a policy where ICANN provides that there can't be a trade of domain names in the open market like there has been?
I'm suggesting that if NTIA approved price increases, they may well approve something that benefits purportedly the consumer. And instead of paying $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million for a domain name, they should be able to get it for $8 or maybe $10,000 from VeriSign.
Is that a concern, Andrew?
You know, you asked Greg if this was a diversion instead, and it could be. So it could be that VeriSign's throwing this out there it could be a kind of a threat, right? Which is, hey, don't rock the boat here. Let us get our price increases. Don't try to get involved with this with ICANN. It could very well be that. When I read it, you know, obviously I was shocked by the post. I was shocked that they made this post the day after it seemed like they won, right? They got their potential price increases. So, you know, they didn't follow up to that blog post. They said, hey, there's a simple way to basically alter this market and get people domain names at the right price. I've had this debate with lots of people over the past 15, 20 years, and I have never heard a good way to do it. So I'm genuinely interested in how they suggest allocating domains and doing that. But yeah, it could be a diversion. It could be a way to get people to stop talking about this and say, hey, we'll just take our 7% per year, 4 years, so 31%, whatever, in the next 6 years. I think it could be that as well. Honestly, though, after I read that article, I was scratching my head, wondering what VeriSign's goal in it was.
Is there a concern, Zach, that VeriSign is impliedly saying, we're partners, we run the registry, your registrars, your domainers, we all work together. Don't mess with us, because if you do, we're going to mess with you.
Doesn't sound like much of a partnership, Derek.
No, I'm asking, is that a concern, the concern that Greg raises, or is this just about .com prices at the registry level?
Well, you know, I'm a little bit concerned about the tone of this aspect of the conversation, because really, there's nothing wrong at all with discussing the merits or lack of merits of a price increase. This isn't something that we should stifle or fear, or that shouldn't be part of the stakeholder dialogue. I mean, this is an important decision. It's a lot of money's at stake, and there's nothing wrong with VeriSign hearing and facing alternative views to their own. Of course, I know they want to raise their prices, but they shouldn't be surprised that domain investors and netizens and public interest advocacy groups are very concerned about this issue. So listen, it should not be framed, in my respectful view, as shut up and don't talk about this, or there will be a bigger hammer dropped on you. To me, that is not civic discourse, and I don't think that that's the approach that anyone should take. And I fully intend to have a thoughtful, fair-minded discussion about this with whoever is willing to listen.
Any questions for the panel? Right there.
Hi, I'm a registry operator as opposed to a registrar.
Which registry?
.ca. So .com in my backyard is my biggest competitor by far, so I certainly don't speak on their behalf. They make my life difficult, and we're #2 market share in my own country.
In Canada.
In Canada, that's right. But a couple comments and then a question. I mean, I think in conversations like this, language matters, so we've got to be really careful about the language that we use. So when we talk about markets being distorted by regulation, I mean, regulation by definition puts boundaries and guardrails around markets. Distortion is a qualitative adjective for that, so I think we should be careful when we say those kinds of things, or even call the space a monopoly. I mean, monopoly has a very clear definition, and an industry that has 1,200 potential competitors, while one is oversized, it's probably not a monopoly, at least as far as monopoly is defined, and then all of the things that come with monopolies in terms of real government regulation.
I said oligopoly or
monopoly, and that's why I say
just monopoly.
that's why I say words matter. We just need to be careful.
And I did use the word oligopoly.
I know you said,
but you're speaking back and forth. I don't know if everyone can hear you, so maybe you can repeat it.
Sorry? Because this gentleman who comes from the same country as I come said that it's dangerous to use the word monopoly. So I said to him, I did not use the word monopoly alone. I said monopoly or oligopoly. So I did use the word oligopoly, which it is.
Semantics. Well, I have a question for the .ca registry operator. If given the opportunity, would you bid for the right to run .com? This is a real question. And if so, what do you think you could do it for? What would the price be? Real question. You should answer that.
I will answer it. I will answer it. But I'm going to make another comment or two. One thing that we know from primary research is pricing is very elastic in this space, and generally speaking, and pricing is far below the willingness to pay.
You said elastic or inelastic? I think you meant inelastic.
Inelastic. So there's a lot of potential margin available that the industry is not taking for the end user. The willingness to pay is much higher than what the industry is selling at. So I mean, that is just kind of a fact of the industry. Because if prices are raised $1 or $2, my question is, do you think there would be substantial changes to
after making a couple comments about what you said, Byron, you know, I was the one who talked about market distortion. I stand by that. Regulation as market distortion is regulation that mitigates against a free market. In this case, the regulation was around the introduction of top-level strings, and that very clearly drove the market structure in a number of ways. I don't think anybody could argue that the market was not significantly distorted from what it would have been if there had been, you know, either unlimited or significant new string introduction in the 90s. I think the second point that's important, you know, you talked about what I would call excess economic rent. You know, people are willing to pay more than they're charged for a domain name. You've left a variable out there, which is time. You know quite well as a registry operator that every string that you have that is not sold today is worth 0 under that construct. So it's only at the moment that the person wants that particular string that there is an excess in economic rent. And you can't leave time out of that because it's so important in domain names. In fact, it's what creates the whole domainer space. Because every domain bought for resale is bought on the basis of no one at this time is willing to pay this premium, and I bet that at some time in the future they will be. Sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong. And now, ask the question again.
I guess I had 2 questions. The first question I asked was, if there's a price increase that you have to absorb, how are you going to absorb it? Will you charge extra? And my real question there is, will there be any difference in terms of portfolio size, growth? Will it really impact the end user, the register?
Right, and you use the word substantial there, which I guess is a word that I don't like because substantial is in the eye of the beholder. You know, I think that any price increase will necessarily impact a little bit of goods substitution for new strings in new registrations. And it will also impact, I'm sure, for some portfolio holders, some marginally profitable domain names and make them unprofitable. You know, but the bigger issue here is the significant portion of the total namespace that none of that relates to. So I do not like to use the word monopoly, particularly in the context of VeriSign. I am comfortable saying they have a monopoly on 2cows.com, whether I like it or not. So I'm being very, very narrow there, but that's accurate. And it's that huge portion of the namespace where there are not these opportunities for substitution or rational economic decision that, you know, I think are very relevant in the consideration of what should happen going forward.
So would .ca bid for the .com registry, and if so, what price?
I can answer the first part. I'm not sure about the second part. I mean, I have a board that I report to, so only if they say yes. As a registry operator, I would certainly be interested in it. But it comes problems and challenges. As far as price goes, pretty hard to say that really.
We said publicly in 2000, I believe it was in the round where that price increase, the series of price increases from 6 to 7.85. So in the early mid 2000s, we said we'd do it for $1, which was radical at the time. We said in 2014, too much consternation, we would do it for 25 cents. I think that the market, I mean, you know, your eyes get wide. I think that's, you know, not, and you know, I think that the market is what the market is. I mean,
would
it's
you
the right question
to run the registry?
No, there's lots of people who do that, and
that's
not
your
space that we're. I mean, today that's not true. When there was no competition back in the day, absolutely. And you know, today I think the right question, which is an answered one, is if somebody has a 500,000 name namespace, what would a registry charge them? If somebody has 1 million name namespace, what would a registry charge them? Right? And I think there you'd find that answer to be a very, very low per
What if it's 138 million names? What's a fair price?
You know, this should be, you know, price volume related, and the higher the volume, the lower the price. I mean, you know, Byron, you looked at third parties. Would you agree that the higher the volume commitment, the lower the price you'd offer?
Yes, because we've certainly looked at outsourcing our registry. We do it in-house. We built it, but we've certainly...
But when you've looked at supplying other parties?
Yeah.
Right? When you are trying to attract...
We do that. We do that today, and depending, there's a big dependency on exactly how much service they're asking. Is it bare bones or full service? So there's a spectrum, but $1 to $4 is the range.
Questions for the panel? Comments? To your right.
Thanks. Michaeli from Black Knight from Ireland. This is more...
Michaeli, there is no record here. You don't have to do that.
It's so true. I'm sorry about that. But just in terms of the engagement with ICANN, I think it's, for those of you who care about this, engagement with ICANN, there are ways to do that. But I would ask you to please talk to other people and ask them the best way to do that. Please don't come swarming into an ICANN meeting, into the middle of a GNSO council meeting and start throwing bottles at our heads, because that won't get you anywhere. There are appropriate ways to do it. If there's a public comment, if there's a public, you know, there can be public forums at various ICANN meetings. There are ways to do that. There are ways to lobby effectively. There are ways to get your point across. But some ways that people have tried in the past are completely counterproductive.
Okay, no riots at the ICANN meetings.
It can be quite entertaining. I mean,
do it through the proper channels.
But for those of you who might have been at the ICANN meeting in San Francisco, where we had I think it was some avid entertainers were doing something outside the front doors of the building against .MM.
Michaeli, you want to recraft that sentence?
maybe not do our abilities. But no, just, you know, if anybody wants to have their voice heard, and I know the ICA works a lot for the domainers. There's quite a few of us who turn up at some of these events who can kind of guide you in the right direction and just say, you know, this might be the way to do that. But just please don't just kind of turn up and start throwing rotten vegetables at my head or anybody else's. Right?
Questions for the panel? Comments?
I have just one more comment. Sorry, just one.
Okay, and then while you do that, way over there, if you have another mic, gentleman over there could go next. Go ahead.
This is a super interesting panel and a really thorny problem because of the unique nature of COM. But one of the other ways to think about it, because excess rents, as Elliot raised, is really at the heart of the issue here, given the unique nature of .com. So one of the ways to look at it and frame it is compared to what? Compared to the other major TLDs, like what's the wholesale value, where does it plot with the other ones? And that's just one way to look at it. Is it grossly beyond what the other ones are, or is it in line? Now they have the unique ability to say, raise it $1, and that's $138 million to their bottom line. Is that fair? But that whole notion of excess rents really gets to the...
Okay, simple question for you. I think it is totally in your best interest for VeriSign to raise prices. So do you anticipate if prices are raised, that .ca will sell more names?
I don't think the simple fact of COM raising it $1 or $2 is going to materially impact my zone. I think that we have the opportunity. I mean, all TLDs are doing their own marketing and branding and probably have more leverage that way. But having them be a higher price than me, sure, at the end of the day, that's probably better for us.
But will you sell more names? You said not materially. You have other leverage.
I don't think $1 or $2 on a .com wholesale is going to drive my
What about $10? What if VeriSign raises it to $17.85? You think you sell more .cas?
There is a price point where I'm sure we become so much more attractive price-wise that it's beneficial to us. I don't know what that number is. I don't think it's a lot.
Okay, just a heads up on time. Probably just one of the last questions here, okay?
Chad Folkening. I actually went to White House in 1997, I think, when Ira Magazine, or before ICANN existed. so I've seen a lot of this bullshit kind of play out. There's a company called Handshake, that are trying, handshake.org, that's trying to kind of get rid of the root zone, DNS, redistribution files. So they get a lot of money, they raise the protocol money, I think $158 million protocol value, and a lot of good team behind it. Do you think, it's an uphill battle, right? So until distributed systems can get going, they're harder to get going, and various signs like that, well, they're not a threat yet, but I can see that if they can get the momentum, it's at least putting negotiating a little bit better. Do you guys know anything about Handshake, and do you guys support that? And if you can...
Elliot, quickly, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I think that there are parts of the Handshake effort that I like or admire, I think are noble. I think whenever anybody tries to take on the single authoritative route, they end up just blowing their brains out and losing. There is way too many deep roots in the ground to ever have a hope of, kind of solving that chicken and egg problem. And it was really disappointing to me when I read their intro stuff and then some of the deeper stuff, that they, like a few ICOs who, and blockchain efforts that wanted to try and do neat things in the namespace, then it's like, yeah, and we're going to replace the single authoritative root, and it'll be neat, we'll all get our own TLDs. And it just becomes this, fool's errand that pulls away some other good stuff, in my view.
Thank you for joining us for this discussion about the .com price increase. Zach, and thank you for organizing all this. Andrew, thank you. Elliot, you're always a wealth of knowledge, and you got that new beard. You look even more intelligent. Thank you, everybody.